Mohit Kumar is the founder and CEO of UltraHuman. UltraHuman is a metabolic fitness platform that helps you improve your diet and exercise with the help of glucose biomarkers and elite experts. I am a happy user and it has helped me make changes to my eating habits and daily routine based on data that just can't be refuted. We caught up with Mohit to understand the journey of UltraHuman, what got him started, how he found allies in the early investors and early users, how they're using Slack to build a community of like minded people. Our healthcare system is designed for sick people getting better. At the other end of the spectrum, you have elite athletes looking for ways to find their peak. There's nothing for the healthy people, and that's the gap that UltraHuman is trying to fill. Given the nature of the topic, all statutory warnings apply about not taking anything in this talk as medical advice. Talk to your doctor before taking or trying any ideas that we discuss here. But if you're curious about biohacking and how Mohit embarked on building a startup in a not so common space, go ahead and listen. Welcome, Mohit. Welcome to the CityQ Smartcast.
Glad to be here. Thank you, Harish.
Yeah. So we usually start the conversation with a googly or a bouncer, whatever you want to call it, right? I think this one is going to be very easy for you. So Mohit, what do you know about biohacking that others don't?
What I know about biohacking that others don't. I know that biohacking is for dopamine. It's a fun way to live your life, apart from just being like chasing health as a goal. Imagine that you're able to do experiments on the most complex machine that's out there.
Right.
The most complex machine that's out there is your own body, right? You can't do experiments on somebody else's bodies, unfortunately, but you can at least do some experiments on your own, right? So that's what I think I know. What other people don't know, I don't know. So that's like the straightforward answer. But yeah, you can qualify anything and everything as biohacking, from all the weirdest shit possible. So I have a bunch of stuff in my drawer here that I hope people don't know, people in India don't know about. Yeah.
Great. You've already piqued our curiosity, Mohit. So, what all have you done in terms of experiments? And if you can briefly walk us through the kind of things that you have done, and was that the journey culminated in UltraHuman, or UltraHuman sort of triggered those experiments? You want to comment on both?
No, I think it's really started, or it usually starts for anyone when they have a lot of time at their hands. In the year 2010, I actually had a lot of time in my hands. Why? Because I had passed out of college. I was working for a startup which was operating at its own pace, and which is fun, by the way. I'm not saying it's a bad thing. It's rare to find such companies that basically have their own pace, and basically they believe in the not like anti-hustle culture in some ways. So for me, the advantage was that I had 3 days a week that was usually chill, basically like Friday, Saturday, Sunday. And because of that, I wanted to do something, obviously, because you can't really do nothing when you're in your 20s. And so what I chose to do was to get into cycling, like deeply into cycling. And the cycling community in Bangalore was really interesting. Back then, we used to have something called, and we still have those, something called breves, long form racing formats for cycling. So as much as it sounds ridiculous, people do 100, 200, 300, 400, 600 kilometers, and eventually 1200 kilometers of rides on the bike in one single stretch. So because I had a lot of time as an advantage, so I started getting into some of these rides. Basically met a bunch of people who were similarly free like me, essentially in terms of their time. And many of them were really interesting as well, because you could either find people who are sub 25, or you could find people who are 35 plus.
Right.
There were no people in the middle, by the way. Everybody from 25 to 35 was busy chasing their dreams, aka making money, and sub 25, and because of the bodies are equipped to do these athletic feats, and 35 plus, because by 35 you realize that money is not everything.
Right.
So it was really interesting to meet the mixed bag of people. I was in the first half, the sub 25 group. And what was really cool was that, given that there was a combination of 35 plus people as well, they were really trying to understand that now I don't have an athletic advantage, right? My body has aged. I have spent 10, 15, 20 years building what I wanted to build financially. but I actually don't know how to like basically get into athletics anymore or get into sports or fitness anymore. So they were trying to actually figure out different ways in which they can essentially in some ways hack through their own fitness, health, longevity, whatever you want to call it, right? And what I realized was that was the first culmination of the seed of biohacking in my head, uh, essentially. And as I said earlier, biohacking could be anything and everything, right? It does not need to be only limited to pills and basically methods that are obscure or basically what some people call as gene therapy sometimes of different types and basically like essentially trying to change your whole biology, but essentially anything that helps you accelerate in a genuine health, something that is not mainstream like exercise and nutrition, and it's a derivative of it. That sort of felt like biohacking. So what did people do back then? As much as it is popular right now, people used to essentially get into things like, can I do long fasts and do autophagy, right? Autophagy wasn't discovered back then. So people used to basically think that, oh, long fasts feel detoxifying. So can I get into long fasts that last across like one, like single day, 2 days, 3 days, 4 days, 5 days? Some people did 21-day fasts, and some people did 21-day fasts along with like long cycling stretches, essentially, right? That so it felt really interesting because these are the people who were at the very early, like in India, for example, and obviously in globally as well. You'll have seen similar trends, who are doing their blood work, doing an activity, pushing their bodies, and checking how their blood work has actually moved. That's the most basic version of biohacking, right? So I learned a bunch of those concepts along with those people, and things like why sugar is beyond a certain level poisonous for your body. Why does it affect your health and longevity in the longer run, right? And how our food industry is essentially a whole big lie today, and it's degrading, it's not improving, right? So everything in the world is becoming more efficient and autonomous, and the food industry is becoming more autonomous, but not, it's not becoming better for people, right? We don't have a war, potentially we don't have a war right now globally, but why are we eating? There is a world war going on right now, and scaling our foods, like we just care about feeding people and not about the nutritious value of the food. So those were some of the concepts in the early days, if I answered your question. Yeah, that's how I got started.
Yeah, yeah. So that's a great insight to start with, just to give listeners an idea of, like you said, the germination of how things started for you. We should definitely add the statutory advice. There's no medical advice that we are going to give in this conversation. So people need to take everything with the right kind of
Yeah.
caution, right?
Yeah,
I think
it's
that's.
funny how people like us, because we are responsible people, all of us have to give a caution, and basically the food companies don't have any caution markings on their food. Yeah.
True. Yeah. So I was going to ask you this next question. So you spoke about how things were in 2010, and that's when most of this started. So what happened later? Did you also spend the next 10 years, trying to make money, and you were busy delivering aloo parathas, while now people are you are making people think twice and being more deliberate about having aloo parathas?
I was in the market creation journey to some extent, but yeah, that's not true. I from 2010 till 2014, or actually till 2013 potentially, I used to sell like cycling and doing run. It's called run, by the way, which is basically if you can finish all these marathon races within one time span, essentially you get a title called super randonneur. So I spent time doing all of these things, and by 2013 I got into this 25 to 35 thing myself.
Right.
That's why I know it deeply. Is
Yeah.
basically I joined a company called Ola Cabs. We wanted to win the transportation space in India, and Uber was growing in India. They had launched recently, and it was fun to figure out how do you scale an internet business. That too, it's a cross internet business, right? It's not totally internet. There is offline infrastructure, and then there is internet, and how the internet helps something like that. So it was a really interesting journey back then, and so that's what I did. And then as a follow up to that, I started my own startup in the year 2015, which was essentially called Roadrunner, if you remember right. And Roadrunner was in the logistics space, just like Ola was in the transportation space. The fundamental concept of that there is limited supply, which is fragmented, and then there is the demand source. And if you can integrate supply and demand in a much better way, you could potentially have better efficiencies and better price advantage, and essentially all that value gets passed on to the consumer. So that was the core concept behind basically starting Roadrunner back then. Yeah. And yeah, that's what I did for the first 5 years. You can say 12 to 15. And then there's a follow up to that as well, which is eventually merging with Zomato along the way. Food was a huge category for us from a demand perspective. And it was obvious that there were synergies with a large aggregator like Zomato.
Right.
So we ultimately did decide to merge with Zomato back then, but food delivery was still in its nascent stages. So it was fun to build it from a nascent stage to basically what's potentially a large mature business now.
When did you decide that UltraHuman is something which I want to start? Did you have the basic problem area? I wouldn't even say problem statement. Was that what you started with, or did you start with the product idea? How did that whole thing evolve?
The seeds of the idea were pretty much in 2010, as I mentioned earlier.
Right.
But in the year 2019, after the market creation journey that I had at Zomato by delivering people aloo parathas, I myself was like trying to take a break to focus on my own health. And as a result of that, I actually went to this martial arts camp called Tiger Muay Thai. Tiger Muay Thai is an interesting place because it is multifaceted in terms of martial arts. You can meet interesting people who are not just athletes, but also you can say weekend warriors showing up at the camp. But because it's a captive space, like basically once you get there, there's nothing else to do because you're on an island and you can only fight for 6, 7, 10 hours a day and then rest. So I did that for a few months. And in
Where
that,
was this, by the way?
Tiger Muay Thai is in Phuket, by the way, in Thailand.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah. So I spent a few months there. And the interesting observation in the camp was that just like in the year 2010, I discovered two cohorts of people showing up there. So sub 25 and 35 plus. This time it was similar, sub 25. The only interesting part though was I was in neither of the
Right.
sites. I was not 35 plus. I was not sub 25. But I realized that I could potentially get into 35 plus. Obviously, as I age and I age unhealthily, basically chasing whatever, like basically material goals or whatever, essentially, right? So when I was there, I saw that there was a combination of these two type of people. And again, the 35 plus folks were also really cutting edge in terms of finding accelerated methods to get healthier, to age, an anti-age rather, to some extent. So that again, like you can say in some ways overlapped on top of the existing seed of ideas and reinforce the idea that this is really cool, this is really interesting, because ultimately the only machine that you have access to is your own body. Like essentially the most sophisticated machine you have access to is your own body. And this is the one that you can't really change. Uh, if you don't do anything, you can't really change it. You can't really replace it rather. And you can potentially buy a new car and you can potentially buy a new house, but you can't really buy a new body today. At least it's not possible right now.
Right.
And the other realization to that was that we essentially know more about our cars and our homes than our bodies, which is very weird because like most of our life experiences also arise from the body that we live in. So that was the core genesis. And Vatsal is my co-founder. He's co-founder and the CTO. Both of us essentially, when I was on this break, we used to talk about what are things that we could do as like our next journey. And we used to discuss anything from building something in the remote workspace to basically building like you can say obscure remote tools to some virtual reality stuff, etc. Because we had time. So again, time is an amazing luxury to have.
Right.
And I didn't have any agenda. So basically, I didn't have a starting date. So we used to think about these stupid ideas back then and always arrive at, oh, what can we do to improve our own health? And what's the shortest path? Or what is there a cheat code to health, right? And over time, it became clearer and clearer that what we really want to do is build a cutting edge health company and not anything else. So that was clearer, right? That was the only that became clear over time. So that's how the UltraHuman idea was, or it was not really an idea, to be honest. Right? It was this concept that people want to essentially very interesting information source to improve their health, and very rich information source to improve their health. And this information source could be external, which is basically having access to athletes globally and their training methods, or internal, which is essentially knowing about your own body.
Right.
And what we did over the last 2 years is create a intersection of these two, like external as well as internal. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So I think what has struck me, Mohit, is that the use of data in sports, professional, elite sports, has been around for a long time. And when we look at countries outside India, right? But
Right.
even in India, probably the richest sport like cricket, we actually had a guest earlier on the CTQ Smartcast who was one of the people who was given this job of getting Indian cricket players to get used to data back in 2002. He was part of the squad and the team which won the NatWest trophy and all that. And he used to
Sure.
tell stories about how his job was like getting internet going for them first, build that trust, and then get to the level of just providing some analysis. And from there, of course, the Indian cricket team has now progressed. But what you are doing is also giving a peek into this data-led, quantified life lens that people like me have always wanted to have, but never had a chance to even look at it. Right now, you're making that more mainstream, making that more available. Is that something which drives you, and do you see that acceptance and yearning growing in India?
The most, I'll answer the second one later, the which is about whether it's relevant in India or not. But if you look at the evidence of human performance, right? What is human performance? Basically, if your human health scale is 1 to 10, if you're at 7, can you get to a 10 or a 9 or 9.5? That's human performance scale, right? But then there are other zones as well. If you're at 5, can you get to 7? Which is if you have some markers of a disease, an inability to lose weight, basically metabolic disorders, diabetes, etc., or pre-diabetes. I think 5 might not be diabetes, but pre-diabetes, right? Can you actually get to a healthy state, which is 7 essentially, right? Or basically move from a 3 to 7 or 3 to 5, which is basically you have severe disease and you want to get to a state which has basically lesser severe disease. That's what the person would like. Somebody who has severe disease does not aim for like I need to run a triathlon.
Right.
They will aim for getting rid of like basically the basic problem that they're having right now. Or if they are bedridden, they would want to just move around. And 1 to 3 is what the industry services today, which is somebody has had a critical issue, they're in the ICU, or they have a critical disorder. Maybe 3 to 5 to some extent as well. You go to a doctor and you say that, oh, this is the allergy that I'm having, and the doctor gives you medicine, right? So 1 to 5 is to some extent proven, right, for general people, to some extent, right? There are some inefficiencies there, but you go to a doctor, if you get access to a good one, you will mostly have an answer to your question essentially. And this infrastructure is essentially improving over time as we get access to remote tools. There is telemedicine now, etc. But from in the 5 to 10 spectrum, right, only the, you can say, 8 to 10 or 7 to 10 spectrum is to somewhat extent, you can say, it's to somewhat basically is what's addressed right now. And that too not for like people like you and me.
Correct.
It's addressed only for that top 0.0001%, which is athletes, right? Not even people who have access to money, by the way.
Right.
Only to athletes. And
Correct.
people who have access to money, it's a choice sometimes. But then this is what we feel or what we felt was missing. One example of that is when you work with a sports scientist as an athlete, if you're working and the sports scientist is giving you insights about your own body and you work on those insights, there's a very high probability that you will see results, right? If you have access to a good sports scientist, right? But then there is no parallel to that except the coaches that we have, like the fitness coaches and the let's say the physical trainers that we have. And those are all really good people. The only difference between a sports scientist, a good one, and a physical training coach is that the first one actually looks at a lot of your performance data. And one might argue that, or maybe that data is not important for me. maybe it's important only for athletes, but that's not true, because you're as individual, or you have, if an athlete has a problem of sprinting faster, you have a problem of lack of time. So it's not, your problems are not hard. And this is the realization that we also had along the way, that for a normal everyday individual to get healthy is actually as hard a problem statement sometimes, given their lack of time and commitment, as somebody who is basically an athlete and pushing 15, 16 hours a day or 10 hours a day, essentially, because their challenges are different, but the net outcome of the challenge is the same. Basically, it's a hard problem, right? Given that we realize that there is a gap, we realize that there is play of data in ensuring that there are smarter ways to get fit. There are accelerated ways to get fit. The coaches and people individually who want to take control of their own health would need data to improve their own physiology over time, right? And we saw data as the lowest common denominator here, because anybody and everybody should be able to use it. And you can use it for performance spectrum, which is basically if you want to run a triathlon, or basically participate in a triathlon, or essentially improve your timing there. Or you can essentially use it to get healthier, avoid diseases, or you can use it to essentially revert or reverse the disease as well eventually. And we set upon building this sort of this, you can say, the human health dashboard for your own body, right? Essentially a real-time access to your own health. So whenever you want to see how your health is trending, just like the way, by the way, you see how your money is trending, right? There are financial tools that can tell you how, like we have, if you have an iPhone, you have a stocks app, and I'm sure there are parallels in the Android world as well, but don't have anything that actually tells you what's happening inside your body. Right. So that's the closest parallel to what essentially how we think about our product, right? So, and just to tell you, real time here is the key, is what we believe in, right? There is data, there is immense amount of data out there for people, right? So I think you would have probably done like 15, 20 blood tests. I've done like 15, 20 blood tests in my life, but I've never actioned on any of these, unfortunately, because it's a point in time test. I see it sometimes. I may have actioned on some of these, but usually the people who get blood tests are either lunatics, who essentially want to know about their own body, or basically people who are sick. And there's a lot of sick people data, but there's not a lot of lunatic or healthy people data, right? So if you can understand what's healthy, maybe you can mimic it, right? And improve your health, right? We find the same trouble in doing clinical trials, by the way. So a lot of clinical trials are designed in a way that it's, the control group is usually a sick group, right? Now, what do you have as a control group in healthy people? Less sick people. There's no definition of less sick. Either you're sick or not sick, right? So there is no definition of health span, right? So you potentially can't do any clinical trials, and that's one of the reasons why, when, like, I mean, one of the things that we can say is that one of the reasons why preventive technology is also not growing as fast is because it's hard to clinically validate it. It's harder than, if I were a pharma company, I would say that, oh, I have this amazing pill that helps you reduce your cholesterol, or the bad type, essentially reduces potentially what's qualified as bad type today might not be the reality. But like, say for example, you say that your LDL is up or your triglycerides are up, and this is a pill that can help you reduce it. You show evidence there, you're done basically, right? But somebody who already has LDL sub 100 and triglycerides under control, they move from 100 to 80. Are they less susceptible to a disorder in the future? They potentially are, but nobody has done lifespan studies on them. That's the major gap that we see as well.
One thing I have to point out here, Mohit, you may be too humble and modest to not talk about it. But the thing that I've really loved about using the UltraHuman patch is the whole seamless experience about it. I have heard of others using the same patch that Abbott makes, but they have to download the file, upload it somewhere, and then get a point in time data. And again, it doesn't really give me actionable, intelligence, right? But the performance, the whole experience that I have with the UltraHuman patch is like phenomenal. And the whole packaging, right from the way you send out updates on when what is expected to the experience on the Slack channel, is fantastic. This is not a product placement by Mohit. This is me talking as a happy fan of the product, right?
Please share your QR code after the meeting here.
Yeah. But Mohit, what you were saying earlier brought another question to mind, right? If you look at people trying to start up today, right? Things like logistics and delivery of food, just to give a very lazy example, counter example, right? It seems very easy to start because there are not going to be too many regulational challenges, and I can just get started. Whereas when you talk about the kind of stuff that you are doing right now, right? The whole space is so complex and complicated, right? There are regulatory norms to take care of, and there are just basic challenges, like you said, less healthy versus more healthy. How do you even quantify that, right? So does that sort of put a barrier to entry for people to go in? Was that a question for you also? Is this too hard a problem that I'm going after? Am I going to be able to raise funds? What was that thought process like?
The barrier of curiosity to some extent. When you ask a child what do they want to become, most of them will actually say, "Oh, I want to become an astronaut. I want to basically become a doctor,
Right.
right? I want to become a scientist,
Hmm.
right?" And as we grow up, we trivialize our life goals. Why does that happen? Because we either get too complacent with life sometimes, or we don't know. Oh, this is too hard a goal, right? One of these two. And currently, we live in a society where basically scientific curiosity is not very mainstream, right? Some people who have scientific curiosity or even political curiosity either blacklisted or whitelisted, right? In some ways, both extremes, right? But that happens usually on the political curiosity side. But scientific curiosity isn't something that lands you a job. Now, it potentially has started landing people a job today, which is a great phenomenon, right? But maybe 10, 15, 20 years back, that was not the case. And we're living a generation which has grown up in the last 15, 20 years in some ways. So this generation of people um, where basically having means to survive or success was called financial success back then. The only success was financial success. Um, and for a lot of people, that's still true. Um, this generation optimized to solve the financial goals first. And this is what I did as well, by the way, which is I did not optimize for learning new things. I said, oh, this is what I know. I know how logistics potentially works. So basically, I will go ahead and start something that is simple enough. And once I had this journey, I realized that I'll have a little bit of more freedom at my end. By the way, that's all in your mind, by the way, right? Because you could do the same thing in the first journey as well.
Right.
But and basically, the way to realize that for me essentially was to use it as a stepping stone. But when I was using it as a stepping stone, I was using it as a stepping stone. I did not know that it is a stepping stone. I thought this is my final journey, this is my destination. Along the way, given that I was luckily able to read more stuff, fulfill a little bit of my curiosity with all the. So I was a big fan of books on human biology, essentially, right? No fiction novels and no other stuff, especially no business stuff, essentially, because like for some reason. But I really enjoyed like books about human biology or about scientific curiosity. So some of that essentially helped me in some ways, like you can say, get started on this journey of thinking about the most, like the way we have transportation as a huge human problem, we have energy crisis as a huge human problem. Human health is a similarly large problem as well. And it's going to be a 20, 30, 40, potentially 100-year journey for me if I live that long. So it's a deep enough journey, right? I could potentially, yeah, you can go deep in any domain as possible, but then what are like some domains essentially have much thicker layers of knowledge, right? So there is, to your question, there is a curiosity barrier, right? Which is if you're not curious enough, then it's not a simple business. But if you're curious enough, then probably this is the most interesting business that you'll ever get into, right? Then you potentially can't fail because you have this mindset that you can do this for 20, 30, 40, 50 years and forever. If you could, there's one basic principle about feasibility of things, right? So if you do something for 20 years, most probably it will work. So how do you live for those 20 years? And how do you ensure that everybody who's on this journey with you survive for 20 years? That's what we're solving for.
I can clearly see when you're speaking, you're really driven by the purpose and the journey. So, how easy or difficult was it to get more allies to believe in you and to join this journey? I'm talking about both, say, investors and early employees. Did they just dismiss you saying you are like one of those lunatics doing the blood work?
Some of them, yes, but I think most of them did not. That's a good thing.
Right.
Because we are doing something that is very intuitive, is what I believe. There's nobody in the world who doesn't want to feel better. Like most people want to feel better, right? And when they think about health, it is not a comparable category to every category out there, because it's a potentially a positive impact category that you're building in. Either there are revolutionary new ideas that have the power of changing societies, and basically, if your idea has power to change the society, then people who can see the same worldview as you're seeing, they'll actually work on it. And they'll say that, oh, I believe in the same worldview. And generally, these are people who are, you can say, very evolved themselves, right? So we were not doing something like that. We were not changing the worldview. We were building something that was very intuitive. That having human health data is very intuitive. Right? There's nothing new about it, right? There's no innovation about it, or there's no invention about it. So we fell in the first category, which was essentially if people could really see through the problem and say that, for example, the problem that we're solving is the metabolic disorder problem, which is a problem of a billion people, right? And it's not just that a billion people globally feel it. All of us have some degrees of metabolic disorders. And we have this, even if I don't have a disease today, I have this problem to solve for my own health. I can choose to ignore it. That's a choice. But the most ROI that you'll get out of your life is when you're as far away from disease and as closer to performance as possible. So if you invest in productivity tools, like buying like a subscription to an amazing email app, or if you invest in a great car that runs you, like makes you either move faster or essentially have a great in-car experience, why don't you invest in a platform that essentially basically makes your health better or gives you data to help make your health better? That's essentially the pitch was to people as well as to investors. And the first set of investors who actually took the bet were people who actually knew us, because it's hard to convince people about anything new, right? And eventually we also found people who believed in the same worldview as ours, which was that human health data is important. And the existing folks, obviously, because they were the first believers, they were the first adopters as well. And interestingly, all of our investors are the users of the platform as well. So they're not just investing in from a money perspective, they're actually putting a device on their body and to improve their own performance. So that's crucial for us, right? It's very hard to get something unless you use it, right? I met a prolific founder of, I think, a few years back, and I was in this journey of asking, like, how do you like come up with something that you're passionate about? How do you get passionate about something? Do you sit in a room and think about new ideas? He said, no, that's not what I do. If I'm using what I'm building, if I'm a power user of the product that I'm building, that's potentially the sweet spot for finding the right type of product. If you're not using and if you're building for other people, eventually we all want to do things for ourselves as well, right? So if you're building for other people, make sure that you're building for yourself as well. Otherwise, you'll find solace somewhere else, which is not totally aligned to what you want to do, right? Sometimes, if you can find a combination of these two, that's actually the best mix.
Yeah. I think that's a fantastic insight. Do unto yourself first what you want to do to the world. I think that's working for you. If you are invested and motivated, I'm sure you'll be able to find more people like you.
It's an amazing product management principle, by the way. So some of the best product creators and managers of the world, product managers of the world, they build a feature as if they are the user. It's very counterintuitive, by the way, to regular Gyan, which is build for the users, do user surveys, and find exactly what works for them, and then you figure out. And those are powerful tools. I'm not saying those are not. But then the most, you can say, the closest you'll get to a instinctive answer that is correct is when you actually think about yourself and build this. And in most cases, when you put yourself in the user's shoes, or to be simplistic, you become the user yourself. You say that if I were a user, or if I am a user, this shouldn't be there, or this should be there, right? This feature should be there. This feature should not be there. So that then it becomes very, very easy. You don't have to convince people about your own stuff. You can do the things that you like.
Yeah.
This is particularly helpful when you use your own product.
Yeah, yeah. I'm a firm believer of that. We ourselves have taken that approach. It has worked for us, whether it is on CTU compounds where we build habits for reading and consuming content. So it actually started off as an internal experiment. We were reading and we started posting about it on our social media channels, and people said, "Oh, we want to also be a part of that." We said, "Wait, we need to
Nice.
first figure it out ourselves." And then we actually opened it up, created a slightly different product also. We are ourselves on a streak of what, 1500 days plus now. We know inside out what the users are going through. So I can perfectly vouch for that approach of yours.
Yeah, it's a harder to get concept sometimes,
Correct.
because sometimes we feel that the reasons why organizations slow down is because there's just too many thoughts. They're not they're not focused on a bunch of people driving the thing that they like, but
Right.
it's driven by thousands of people about basically the things that they like individually, and not, or maybe they like it to some extent, but not driven by 10 people liking it deeply. So that's the fundamental difference. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So coming back to your Slack community, I've been part of the Cyborg Army community. How have you been thinking about the Slack as an integral part of what you are doing? And a question that I've always had is, is there some reverse osmosis going on? Are you learning from your users how to think about this? What is happening there? How is the whole Slack community helping you in your journey?
So I think one of the primary reasons why we started Slack as a community exercise, I actually didn't start as a community exercise, to be honest. It started as a way for us to talk to each other, essentially. Right? That's what we do inside the company as well, right? We just talk to each other. In most cases, we'll come up with an answer. And we realize that we're solving a problem that is complex and variable to the extent that it depends on people about how they perceive it sometimes. So, for example, there is this amazing, you can say, thesis around health being a belief system. So you can believe that, oh, I'm healthy. No matter where you are, by the way, or whatever side of the health spectrum you might be, you can potentially say that I'm healthy or I'm unhealthy, essentially, right? And what happens is that because you have a belief system, it's very hard to change that, because you can't really change belief systems. Instead, you can only talk to people. We started this as an experiment to ensure that people are talking to each other, or we are talking to people, right? Like the way we talk internally within our own Slack as well. And what we realized was that over time, people started using this as a fundamental capability to communicate, to share ideas, to contribute to products. So, from a reverse osmosis perspective, we see a lot of contribution coming in from people in terms of either the exceptions to the platform, that this is what does not work, which is great because that helps us evolve the platform, but also understand what works for people to some extent, right? And also to some extent for people to hang out and discuss their own stuff. If you have followed recently, we started doing stuff that's got to do with nothing to do with cyborg as well, which is we do these offline meetups and these running sessions, and we realize that a lot of people inside the company are passionate about sports in general and nothing to do with cyborg as well. So how do we channel that curiosity onto the platform as well? Eventually, we want this to be a place for the first early adopters of the health revolution to be a part of, right? Basically, people who are the original OG biohackers of India, people who are trying to improve the human performance, trying to go to the next level of human performance. Those are the people whom we would expect to be a part of this. And that's the goal. That's the only goal around this.
Yeah, yeah. And I think, like you said, just bringing them on a platform where they can connect with each other and identify with someone. For example, I have seen a bunch of our subscribers who are into reading. That was the prime identity that I had associated with them. Right? Once I joined, I saw a bunch of them on this platform, and I was like, oh, then at the core level, I know these are people who are interested in habit building and generally widening their horizon. So now I can relate to that, right? That yeah, this is a platform where they need to be there, and that's got nothing to do with either cyborg or reading, but that's who those people are. I think that's what the community is letting us, as I'm speaking as a member of the community here.
Yeah, absolutely. It's potentially like when you are in a market and you meet a few people around you,
Correct.
try to have a genuine conversation at a coffee shop. So that's exactly how we want to this to be.
Right.
Like, it's not a formal platform. It's not something that has got to do as much
Right.
with UltraHuman or Cyborg. It's
Right.
got to do
Right.
with like-minded people trying to do something.
Coming to the last section of the conversation, Mohit, I wanted to talk about your take on organization building, right? I've seen some of your other interviews where you've spoken about how you want to build UltraHuman. One question that came to my mind while you were talking about the health dashboard for humans, right? So, is there a similar dashboard that you look at for the company's health as well? And I'm not talking about the standard financial metrics, not just that, but as a company, what would that ideal dashboard for a company be in your mind?
So the most interesting data point, whether it's in the form of dashboard or a report or let's say a dump of data, is what percentage of people are actually seeing impact in their own life, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
How many people? Because we measure the interventions, but we also measure the outcome. We
Hmm.
had this unique position where we are able to measure the outcomes for people,
Hmm.
right? So are people actually able to see improvement, right, by just putting on the server wearable?
Hmm.
And that's what keeps motivating us, because um, the health problem is not a problem of money
Correct.
to some extent, right?
Hmm.
Which is, it's not like people who have the access to money are actually healthier,
Hmm.
right? They are financially healthier, but they're not healthy from a biological perspective.
Hmm.
If it's not a matter of money, then if you're able to create impact in people's life by changing their behavior, that makes a huge difference,
Hmm.
right? Fundamental difference, right? So that's what we track as a core health metric for the product is working on. And it's a net sum of everything, the community that we have around Cyborg, or essentially the app experience and the external social handles, or basically our offline meetups. Everything contributes to this, by the way.
Hmm.
Why? How does everything contribute to this? In a social meetup, I met somebody who basically was on their day 3 of the journey, and they were unable to basically figure out, like, this person was essentially scoring pretty well on the cyber platform.
Hmm.
They were doing keto diet, and their scores were naturally on the higher side. They're like, oh, this is nothing new, and how do I optimize my performance by this hardware, because my glucose levels are not spiking because I'm
Hmm.
eating mostly ketogenic food, and looks like it is reconfirming to me that I'm healthy. That conversation led us to a point where we basically said that that's true. You're currently limiting the amount of carbs that you're eating, but is it the state? Is this going to be a state that will be in the next 20 years,
Hmm.
or the next 10 years, or maybe the next 5 years as well? So obviously the answer was no. That I will indulge once I'm off this journey in carbs or things that I want to eat. So how do you actually stay healthier, or basically stay in the optimal zone when you're actually doing some of those things? So that led to the person actually experimenting more
Hmm.
and understanding that when I eat a normal diet, which basically has a little bit of carb component, has basically all the other things that I want to eat, then the scores are not in the 80s. Then the scores pretty much lie in 60s, or basically in the early 70s sometimes.
Hmm.
So there is some scope to optimize, and these things cannot really happen only by the platform. These sometimes have to happen by interactions. So everything comes together,
Hmm.
and that's what we track as health metric. Everything apart from like the financial metrics and
Hmm.
user growth and retention and everything else. And we in fact track retention as a combination of retention, which is basically existing subscribers minus churn, but also you can say like the frequency of usage, because eventually if this is data, there's no reason for people to churn out. Like might have a one time per year, or 2 times per year, or 3 times per year use case. Sometimes people want to use it 12 times per year or 24 times per year, right? But these are all use cases. These are not somebody who's taken or basically gone through this journey in January and has not used the platform for 3 months. Does not mean they have churned out. For us, it's a different frequency, and maybe that is what they need. In medicine, there is this concept of just enough, which is over medicine is also not good. So how do you get to it's called there's a term for it. Um, it's called the minimum required dosage or something like that, right? The minimum amount of dosage for maximum impact, right? So it's the same concept. How do we get you the minimum amount of dosage for maximum amount of impact, right? So that's what we usually track
Right.
inside the company. Yeah.
Yeah. And do you extend this to your company culture as well? What do you track there to see whether you are building the kind of culture that you always wanted to?
We're still a very small team. I think what and culture is, I think, extremely complex as a problem statement. It cannot really be only measured. It has also to be instinctively felt.
Correct.
Sometimes. But I think what we really aspire to do individually is that it should feel your own life's work and not just working for the company. That's what we want it to be. So when does it become life's work? Because like the way we are using the product ourselves and benefiting from it, and then building the product as well, we get a chance to build the product that we are benefiting from. If it is happening for you as well, then you potentially have the same gratification loop for yourself, which is that I like something, I'm benefiting from it, and then I get a chance to change it or improve it. So that's core to our culture in some ways. Whatever we are building, it does not mean that only the existing product or the new products that are going to come. I think products are very temporary in our companies, and products evolve right over time. You come up with something new, and that new thing sounds as shiny as something that was there in the past, right? But then what seems interesting as a group of creators is that you have the ability to create together, right? A group of like-minded people are able to create together, essentially, right? We think of our teams as sports teams because of those reasons. And when you look at a soccer team, for example, right? When you're in a match, you if a defender gets a chance to score, they will score, right? A striker gets a chance to score, they will obviously score, right? That's what they're there for mostly. Midfielder will also pounce on the opportunity, but then they also have their specific roles. And it's not that a striker is better than a defender or is better than midfielder, right? They're all playing their individual positions, right? And they're in a good team. Everybody is gratified for their position in the team. And if midfielders don't work, then the strikers won't be able to essentially execute, right? And vice versa as well. If strikers don't work, then midfielders put in so much amount of work. It doesn't really work. Basically, that's the symbiosis that we see inside of the company as well. That we are all in different roles, but our roles are equally important. It might seem, because usually strikers get a lot of attention, right? The people who score the goals, right? That they're the most important people, but that's not always true. And some of the best teams in the world, it's not because of strikers being great. Some of the best teams in the world are because the entire team is well balanced. In fact, we have seen teams where essentially it does not really matter how everyone, like how good strikers are, like how good everyone is to some extent matters a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. One of the last few questions, Mohit. If you can talk about some of the books, podcasts, people that have shaped your thinking, what would you recommend to people who are interested in biohacking?
We're interested in biohacking. Okay. There's a book called Why We Get Sick. Um, and it's an interesting read because it talks about how insulin plays a role in your health and how understated it is, under talked about it is, right? All we talk about is glucose and basically the effects of sugar, but how insulin plays a huge role, right? And of course it is largely driven by sugar as well, but it's important to understand insulin as an independent element and the entire elements of physiology that it affects inside your own body. So that's one. Then there is a book by Dr. Kraft called, it's a thin one, it's very easy read. It's called Diabetes, Epidemic and You. And it's not about only about diabetic people, by the way. Don't go by the title. It's about like how anybody and everybody is at risk of diabetes to some extent, right? It's diabetes is not just one disease. It's not a switch. It's a spectrum. We're all in some ways, like basically disposed to it, right? And sometimes it manifests in different ways. in your own body, like other metabolic disorders.
Hmm.
So this is a book by Dr. Kraft. It's called Diabetes Epidemic in You. And then if you want quick biohacking stuff, I think nothing's better than Tim Ferriss's 4-Hour Body.
Right.
Yeah, it's still the book that I refer to sometimes. It's Tim Ferriss. I don't think there's anybody who's actually done more and achieved more than him in the world of biohacking yet, in a super authentic way, because he's exactly the example of like high performer, polymath, trying to do everything in life and at the same time hacking their own biology, right? So the 4-Hour Body is a really interesting read as well. And I think lastly, if you think about scientific curiosity, right? Basically, what how do you actually think about hard problems and scientific problems? And there's a book called Microbe Hunters. It's about how different people in their own walks in their own life discovered different types of microbes potentially via serendipity. They were not looking for it. Like how the in some ways formulation of beer led to formulation of different pharmaceutical grade drugs essentially. And that's why if you read that book, you'll realize that how beer saved everyone's lives, because the same science is essentially used across essentially all those other type of drugs as well. Because and it's not really about the methods and tools that they use, but about the mindset, right? One thing that I realized while reading that book, and it's a special mention, is because it says that you might think a scientist is somebody who essentially has access to a lab and tools and methods and is highly educated in this domain and has years of research behind them. But the most interesting discoveries have happened from people, has also happened from people who didn't have access to any of these things, and just by the power of observation. So that's a fundamental tool, because power of observation essentially trumps almost everything out there.
Yeah, yeah. So that's a great list. I will add one recommendation from my side, which is a podcast. This is the Huberman Labs podcast. We've been tripping over it for the last few months, and I would highly recommend anyone who's interested in understanding human body to start listening to Huberman Labs. I think that's a fantastic recommendation from my side.
Also, if you want to add to that, there's the Lifespan podcast by David St. Pierre. So
Right.
that's also pretty interesting.
Yeah. All right, so we've come to the end of this conversation, Mohit, but we're not going to let you get away without giving your hot takes on certain things. So, what I would ask you to give your hot take on is basically the future relevance of something. I'm going to give you 2 to 3 words, terms, things, and I want your hot take on that.
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
So, the first one is, what do you think is the future relevance of non-cricketing sports in India?
Non-cricketing sports in India, I would put my bet on badminton.
Okay.
Yeah. And the reason for that is the sheer amount of new badminton talent that we have in India right now. It's
Right.
phenomenal.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's also becoming a micro culture within societies,
Correct. Yeah,
if you see
yeah,
it. Something to become relevant at the performance level has to first become this micro culture. The other option would have been squash, potentially.
yeah. And then with Gopi Chand, he's also perfected the factory model for churning out these champions. Not just one individual player who succeeds despite the system, but actually there's a
Yeah.
system that is working there now. So I think that is also
That's a really interesting point. And that's the difference between Russian athletes and American athletes, which is like Russian athletes have an amazing system of training. American athletes have, actually, American athletes also have an amazing system of training. Indian athletes are the ones who are like the ones with most amount of grit because they don't have any systems yet. But I think Gopichan has obviously brought a change, massive change to the system as well. Yeah.
What do you think is the future relevance of gymnasiums in India? Gyms.
I think quite simply they'll become more data backed, because what they want to support is bio individuality, which is all of us are different people, and all of us will essentially have different journeys of improvement. So instead of having a common method for everyone, and there will be common methods because those are important, the group fitness class is still relevant, but then some interventions are going to be more data backed. And I think that's going to be a big one. And I feel that there'll be a strong nutritional element as well in the gyms, because this is the evolution that we have seen across all gyms that have actually survived over the last 10, 15 years. Each of these gyms either have an amazing culture, or they are very well integrated with the ecosystem around themselves. Like the Tiger Muay Thai gym that I was telling you about. It's an amazing case study in itself. It's on a street called Soy Taiyad, which is it's called potentially the fittest street in the world, because all top athletes train in the same street, and you'll find all the restaurants that are there are catering to similar type of needs of people. They're all mostly fresh, farm sourced type of foods, vegetables, meats, essentially. So everything aligns when you build the right culture, and this is what has happened there as well.
Yeah, yeah. And the final one, slightly left of field as compared to the rest of the conversation. What do you think is the future relevance of multiplexes in India?
Multiplexes, and I've not been to one in the last 2 years, so it's a hard one. I just feel that it has to become way more experiential than what it is right now. And not the 4D ones that are like usually very shitty,
Right.
but basically in terms of the sound and the virtual experience, and let's say the having access to, let's say, all these visual effects. The theaters have to go the extra notch, because seeing content has now become a commodity. You can see anything anywhere on OTTs. What the multiplexes give you is focus, right? You are locked in. You can't do anything else. You're just locked in. You're focused. So it could be an immersive experience. So if you can make that immersive experience better by improving the immersiveness by new technology in terms of sound as well as visual technology, that is potentially what, and you could potentially see in the next few years that either each one of us land in the same theater and wear a bunch of wearables on our body and then essentially experience the movie, or it could actually be brought to your home as well. So I think there'll be a tussle between at-home technology and in theater technology for some time. Personal belief is that at-home technology will eventually win.
Okay.
Yeah, because a theater, because it's supposed to be a space where you don't interact, right? You can't interact. There will be disturbance for people. So there is not as much social experience as much if you would like, and some elements could also be replicated in a virtual environment.
Yeah. I can imagine watching a Rocky movie on the Oculus and exchanging
Along with a
notes
group of
with
people.
you, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So, yeah, that's a nice future to look forward to, Mohit. But on that note, I think we touched upon a variety of things from your personal journey to how UltraHuman has evolved and what is your take on biohacking. I think this is a fantastic chat. Thanks a lot for your time, and I think we've probably spent what 1 hour, 5, 10 minutes sitting. So I think it's time for me to go for my 15-minute walk. Otherwise, my app is going to give me some very bad signals, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Walking is important. Walking more frequently is even more important.
So on that note, thanks a lot, Mohit.
Thank you. Thank you.